Hello, and welcome to Healthy California podcast. My name is Linda Brown, and I am the host of Healthy California, where my goal is to help educate you on your daily choices so we all can become healthy. I believe you, your family, your neighbor, and your community are all looking for better ways and simple ways to return to being healthy. Many of you have health issues or have family that's going through tough times that seemingly have no answers. It's frustrating. There are questions about health, environment, foods, exercise, and lifestyle, and it can be all overwhelming. And who do you believe? And where's the science behind it? This podcast will unravel the mystery behind being unhealthy and talk about little things that we can do in our lives to make a positive change in our health from all angles. So to be healthy, we need to have physical health, mental health, environmental health, financial and social health, and of course, spiritual health. Let's answer some of these questions to get healthy. What good is just listening to a podcast? I will give you resources as well, ways to take steps and make positive changes in your life to becoming healthy. This is a journey, not an assignment, so be kind to yourself. Okay, welcome back, California. This is Linda Brown, your physical therapist and your functional nutritionist here in California. Today, we are talking about breathing, a big subject. And coincidentally, I am recording this in the highest city in the world. Well, really the highest city is La Alta, Bolivia, but La Alta is a suburb of La Paz, which is where I am right now, the highest city in the world. I have spent my last week anywhere between 12,000 and 13,000 feet of elevation. And so today we're talking about breathing. And that was just coincidental. So I have a lot to say about breathing and oxygen exchange. So let's dive in. So what is breathing? Breathing is the process of air coming in and out of your body. But it's more than just that. It's not quite that simple. So it's an exchange. At the lungs, we have exchange of oxygen. Oxygen comes in and CO2 comes out. And then the oxygen gets transferred to your tissues, like let's say your muscles. And then at that point, the oxygen goes into your muscles and CO2 comes out. So it's an exchange, both in your lungs and at the tissue level. I'm going to pause right here and apologize in advance for any background noise. There is no good time to do any recording in this large city. So in the background, you'll hear honking, construction, whistling, dogs barking. Who knows what you're going to hear, but I apologize in advance for whatever goes on in the background. Let's get back into defining what breathing is. So it's an exchange. At one point, oxygen comes in the body, the CO2 leaves, and then at the tissue level, the CO2 leaves the tissue, and then the oxygen comes in. So it's an exchange. So why is this important? Many things affect breathing. If anything is off, it's going to affect the amount of oxygen being delivered to your body, which that means if you're not getting enough oxygen in the body, then you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, to your heart, to your muscles, to your organs, really to anything that needs oxygen, which is pretty much every cell in the body. If you think about it, you can go weeks without food, you can go days without water, but you can only go minutes without air. So that's how important this is. We have to have oxygen in our body. And if we don't have oxygen being delivered to our cell, that cell could die. So what are the causes of low oxygen? And I'm not just talking about no oxygen, because obviously no oxygen will cause death. But I'm just talking about low oxygen. What happens when we have low oxygen? We might not even know we have low oxygen, but living with low oxygen can be very detrimental. So what are the causes of having low oxygen? Well, the obvious one to me right now is just having not enough oxygen in the environment. I'm at almost 13,000 feet, and the air molecules here are less than they are down at sea level, which is where I live, at sea level roughly. But more than that, there is not enough pressure in the atmosphere to push the oxygen into my lungs and into my blood system, really. It's not just the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, it's the atmospheric pressure that's the most important part. And we need that pressure to push oxygen into our blood. So that's one cause of low oxygen, is just the environment. But you could also be in a room that has low oxygen. What else? The demand or need for oxygen can affect your oxygen levels. So increased metabolism, such as a fever, can also increase the demand for oxygen. So the demand will affect how much oxygen is coming into your body or CO2 leaving your body. The inability of lungs to expand or ribs to expand can affect the amount of oxygen coming in. If you think about having something tight around your rib cage and your rib cage can't expand, that can affect the amount of oxygen coming into your body. Your ribs were meant to expand so that your lungs underneath those ribs can expand. And if those ribs don't expand, your lungs are not going to be able to expand either. And the reason why that's important is because our ribs were created to expand. That's why heavy breathing is important. That's why breathing exercises can be important. And that's why exercise is important. The activity level increases the demand, and your ribs will expand and then come back to normal, recoil back to normal. And if you're not breathing heavy every now and then, that's going to affect how much oxygen is being exchanged, and it could affect the long-term ability of your ribs to expand in the future. Just like anything else, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, which means your rib cage can be kind of like stuck. And I've seen that so often in my physical therapy practice where the ribs just don't expand anymore. So that's really important. And if you think also about the ribs being able to expand, we need that sort of pumping action of your ribs to return blood back to the heart and to pump your lymph system. And your lymph system is your immune system highway. Just being able to expand your lungs is very, very beneficial. I'm not even talking about just for breathing. Yes, expand your lungs, which means go for a walk that's going to make you breathe heavy. And if your ribs can't move because of compression, it'd be like trying to take a big deep breath with something sitting on your chest. So compression, you could have something tight around your chest. Maybe your clothes might be a little bit too tight, or you're wearing a tight belt, or whatever it is that is compressing your ribs could be affecting your oxygen exchange. And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad for the short term. There's times where we need to wear something that might be compressive. I'm talking about long term. We're talking about low oxygen chronically can be detrimental. So what else causes low oxygen? Blockage of air coming into the lungs. Blockage can be something physical, like something caught in your air passage that's going to cause lack of air coming in. It could be asthma or bronchitis, which is spasming the airway, like a muscle spasming, and or inflammation that causes that airway to be smaller. And then also damage of the alveoli. Alveoli are the little air sacs in your lungs that oxygen goes into. It looks kind of like a cluster of grapes, and those little sacs is where the exchange happens. And they're so tiny, and they're so delicate. These alveoli are only one thin cell thickness. So if you think about a cell, it's a flat cell, it's very thin, and it's very delicate. And all these little single cell layered alveoli allow oxygen to come in, CO2 to come out. And if those are damaged, then that doesn't happen. So what damages that alveoli? Smoking, pollution, inhalation of the smoke from the fires, that damages your air sacs or your alveoli. And smoking or smoke inhalation from fires, even just a short term, can do as much damage as a chronic smoker. It's a different type of smoke, and it's a very damaging type of smoke. So if you have been exposed to wildfires or house fires, even just for a short term, you could potentially have damage to your lungs right now and not even know it. So you need to think about how you are going to get your lungs healed and back to normal. And if you don't know, but you know you've been exposed, I would go and do an oxygen saturation test. It's simple. They put it on your finger. They check your oxygen saturation. Any physical therapist is going to have that. Most doctors' offices will have this little oxygen saturation, pulse oximeter is what they call it. And just see what your oxygen saturation is. Ideally, it should be above 95, and for an average healthy person, around 97%. And if you're lower than that, then you are not getting enough oxygen to your body, including your brain, including your lungs. And you might not even know it. And that's the thing, is you might not even know it, but it's doing this long-term damage. What else can cause blockage? Mucus. Mucus covering the alveoli. And when I think of mucus, I think of mostly like cystic fibrosis. And chances are you don't have that. Blockage in general is, whether it's from something blocking the passage or spasming of the airway or damage to the alveoli or mucus, it's all blockage. I want to take a second to share a helpful resource with you. I have a free health questionnaire designed to pinpoint the areas in your life that you need to focus on for optimal wellness. If you're interested, simply click the link in the show notes or visit heal-throughfood.com to access it. Now let's dive back into the show. So it's something to think about. What else causes low oxygen? Well, what about anxiety? Anxiety can increase your breathing rate, your heart rate, and that's a nervous system thing. And then again, little oxygen exchange happens. And then there is breathing in pollution. We talked about it a little bit when I talked about blockage and smoke inhalation, but pollution, cigarette smoke, land fires, smoke, that's all damaging the lungs. So short-term smoke from fires cause a lot of damage, and that's in a study done by Kim et al. Kim is the last name, back in 2021. There's all sorts of studies on this, but that's the one study that you can find in my references. And if you're a firefighter or are someone who has been near land fires, wildfires, I would highly recommend doing a detox of your body, because you could have some damage, not into your lungs, but you could have toxins in your body. So if you have been near a wildfire and haven't done anything about it, please just go get checked. Get your oxygen saturation checked, because you don't want to have low oxygen. We're going to go over the reasons why that's so detrimental. We'll go over that in a second. What else can cause low oxygen? Well, here's a big one, sleep apnea. So a lot of people have sleep apnea, and if you think about sleep apnea, you're sleeping 8 hours a day, roughly, and if you are having moments during your sleep where you're not breathing, think about being suffocated. For 8 hours, you have these moments of suffocation. And having those little moments of not having any air can adversely impact all your organs. But I'm just thinking just your brain, because that's the major organ, right? That's the one that the body's always trying to protect, the brain. If you don't have enough oxygen for 8 hours out of your day, you are going through these little moments of suffocation. That is going to affect your brain. So I'm saying sleep apnea, but what I'm really saying is lack of oxygen, even chronically, can increase motor vehicle accidents, work injuries because you're tired, daytime sleepiness, decreased learning, and decreased memory. And that all kind of seems obvious, but then there are things that we don't think about, which is lack of oxygen or sleep apnea, neurocognitive impairments, memory, executive function, decreased attention, neuropsychological impairments like depression, anxiety, ADHD, also the heart, like cardiovascular disease, which is like hypertension, congestive heart failure, atrial fibrillation, arrhythmias, stroke. Also can increase asthma, COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, pulmonary embolisms, hypertension. It can also affect the endocrine system, like type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, sexual dysfunctions, male and female hormones. It can also affect GI disorders, gastroesophageal reflux, GERD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Those are all things that can just be affected by having low oxygen. And in this case, low oxygen is from sleep apnea. So the reason why I mentioned sleep apnea and all these is because there are studies from Faria in 2021 and Espiritu in 2021 as well that actually did studies on how each of these were caused by sleep apnea. So having sleep apnea is very destructive. What else can cause low oxygen? Well, when I talk about low oxygen, specifically I'm talking about oxygen that's coming in through the lungs and then being transported to the tissue. But what about if there is oxygen coming in through the lungs, but it's not being transported to the tissue? I'm thinking mostly of like anemia. You have oxygen available, but there's not enough red blood cells to transport it. That's what our red blood cells do. They transport oxygen. What if you don't have the ability to do that? So you have decreased red blood cells, which means you have decreased oxygen carrying capacity. Anemia is really decreased oxygen carrying capacity, and that can be from iron deficiency. That's the most common. But you could also have a B12 deficiency or folate deficiency. You could have sickle cell anemia, which is a mutation of the red blood cell. There's a lot of different types of anemia, and all those would affect the oxygen carrying capacity. So anemia would be another reason you wouldn't get oxygen exchange. And at this point, I'm talking about oxygen exchange at the tissue level. Once you breathe the air in, do you have the ability to carry it to the tissue? So how does this affect you? If you think about anything I just talked about, anything that affects oxygen coming in, the oxygen in the environment, your altitude, atmospheric pressure, the demand, the inability for your lungs to expand, blockage of the airway, nervous system, pollution, cigarette land fires, sleep apnea, anemia, all those could affect you. So even if you just have one of those, that can affect what is going on in your body, because every single cell in your body needs oxygen. And having even just a little bit low oxygen can affect you. And you might just see it as fatigue, and you may not see it as fatigue. But sometimes if you think about going to your doctor because you're fatigued and they do a blood test, oh, you're low on iron, and they give you iron and that brings your energy back. That's just one of the many things that can cause decreased oxygen exchange, but there's so many more. So take it seriously if you have sleep apnea, or if you have been exposed to pollution or smoke, or you're sick, you have a high metabolic demand. All those things can affect you. You don't even want to be low on oxygen for a short time. As best you can, increase your oxygen. So how do you do that? How do you increase your oxygen? If you think about what I just talked about, going to a lower altitude, that might not always be sufficient for you. If you are at high altitude like I am, your body will adapt, of course. There's obviously millions of people here living in La Paz, and they're doing just fine. So your body will adapt. But being chronically low in oxygen and the body not being able to adapt to that is not good. So you can do things like breathing exercises. And a lot of times yoga, Pilates, they will focus on breathing. But you can do breathing exercises at home. Anything that's going to expand your chest, that's going to make you take a big, deep breath. I like to keep it simple. So there is this breathing exercise called 4x4 or box breathing, which just means, and you can do it right now. So it's a 4 count of a big deep breath in, and then you're going to hold it for 4 counts, and then you're going to breathe out for 4 counts, and you're going to hold that for 4 counts. And you can do that multiple times throughout the day. You can do it constantly. You could do it to decrease anxiety, decrease stress. There's a lot of reasons to do breathing exercises. I've mentioned it in the past in previous podcasts because it is so beneficial. However, this is a great reason to do a breathing exercise because it does increase the oxygen into your lungs. And then you can do things like just expanding your ribs. The breathing exercises will do that, expanding your ribs. But also if you have ribs that are hard to expand, like they're already starting to get stiff, then there are stretches, there are exercises that you can do. Ask a physical therapist, ask me. There are things you can do to expand your ribs and get them from being stuck. And if you have any blockage, asthma, bronchitis, you want to make sure that that's being addressed. You want to do things that are going to heal your lungs and detox the smoke that you inhaled. And of course, you can contact me on that as well, or contact a functional nutritionist. So if you have anxiety, you can address your anxiety by doing stress management, and I have a podcast on that. And breathing exercises will help that as well. Anything you can do to get your anxiety down. If you have medically diagnosed anxiety, you want to make sure that that's being addressed, because being anxious or hyperventilating when you're not even thinking about it can be detrimental. Sleep apnea, you want to address that. It's one of the things you can do is make sure you are getting not even just enough hours of sleep, but you have good quality sleep. And if you don't know if you have sleep apnea, ask the person who sleeps next to you, because they will know better than you. And if they say yes, you wake up all night long like you're choking, take that seriously. Don't put that off, or don't not believe them, because they will know better than you. If you have a wearable, like a watch, that will tell you what your sleep number is or tell you that you are waking up during the night, take that seriously. That's there for a reason. And just check in on it a couple times a week, just to make sure that you're still getting a good night's sleep and that you're actually not waking up choking. The other thing is that some of these wearables will track your oxygen saturation, and that ideally needs to be 97 or above. It's not anything worrisome until it gets below 95. And then if it stays chronically below 93, that's bothersome. And then just make sure that you're eating healthy so that you don't develop iron deficient anemia. If you are vegetarian or vegan, you want to make sure you're on a vitamin B12 supplement, because you get your B12 mostly from meat. So make sure you're on a supplement, because if you're low in B12, then you are at risk of pernicious anemia. So there's a lot of reasons that vegetarians and vegans should take vitamin B12. And then if you're feeling like you're fatigued all the time, maybe you should go get some blood work done. That's a good place to start. But I'm always going to say diet and exercise. Eat a good diet. Exercise gets the blood pumping, gets the ribs expanding, and it forces you to take big, deep breaths in. So make sure you get enough exercise. You don't have to run a marathon. You can go for a walk. If you're going for a walk, make sure you're getting to a point where you're breathing heavy every now and then so that your ribs are expanding. That's what the body was meant to do. It's meant to move, and the ribs are meant to expand. So thank you for joining me. But as always, I am going to leave you with a scripture of the day. So this is my scripture that I'm going to read to you. It's from John 15:12. He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." And the reason why I like this one for this breathing podcast is because I talked about ways to heal from things like low oxygen. You can go for a walk, you can expand your lungs, but loving one another is the most healing of all. They say laughter, loving. It is so true that loving your neighbor, loving yourself is the most important part of life, and it is very healing. And if you are in an environment that is loving, people are going to be watching out for you. You're going to be watching out for people, and there's a healing quality to that. We are meant to be in a state of love, and yes, love can be painful at the same time, but love is very healing. So I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you knowing that you are loved. Even if you don't know me, I still love you, and thank you for being here. And you can always contact me. All my information is in my show notes, or linda@heal-throughfood.com. And if you have any questions or want more information on how you can breathe better, get more air into you, then please contact me. And I hope that you stay healthy, California. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something new. Health care and treatment should focus on being proactive and preventative, emphasizing the importance of addressing the root cause of a disease or illness. While the U.S. has an excellent trauma medicine system, helping patients when problems arise, our goals should be to prevent disease before they happen. That's why this podcast is so important to me. If you're needing further guidance or have questions on a particular matter, you can find my contact information in the show notes, where you can set up a 15-minute consultation. I also recommend you adding a functional nutritionist, a functional medicine practitioner, and a physical therapist to your healthcare team. This podcast reflects my personal opinions based on extensive research and education. It is not intended for medical diagnosis or treatment and should never replace the advice from your doctor or other healthcare professionals. To continue providing this free information, I rely on your support. Follow, subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your family and friends, or on social media. Don't forget to turn on your notifications to stay updated whenever I have a new episode released. Educating you and empowering you to take back your health is my ultimate goal. By gathering knowledge and implementing small but impactful changes, you can reclaim your well-being. This is a journey, not a quick fix, so be kind to yourself, and I'll be there to help. You got this.